When someone turns away from you, when their silence becomes a wall, when their absence feels like an erasure, the first tremor inside you is not grief, but panic. It is the primal fear of vanishing from someone's world, of becoming irrelevant in the eyes of another. And in that moment, without thinking, you reach out. You text, you call, you over-explain, you over-apologize. You do anything to provoke a reaction, to reinsert yourself into their awareness. But this is precisely where the unraveling begins. Not because you care too much, but because you have mistaken caring for clinging. You have confused love with leverage. And in doing so, you have surrendered the one thing no one can ever truly take from you, your sovereignty over your own emotional landscape. Carl Jung understood that the unconscious does not operate on logic, but on patterns. It repeats what it knows, even when that repetition causes pain. If you feel a surge of desperation when someone ignores you, it is not merely about them. It is about an ancient echo within you, a whisper from childhood, perhaps when love felt conditional, when attention was currency and silence was punishment. That echo still lives in your nervous system, waiting for the right trigger to rise again. And when someone ignores you now, it is not their indifference that wounds you. It is the ghost of every time you felt unseen before. This is why your reaction is so automatic, so visceral. You are not simply responding to the present moment. You are reliving an old story. A story in which your value was tied to another's gaze. A story in which you learned that to be loved, you must be noticed. And so you chase. You perform. You shrink yourself to fit into their field of vision. But here's the cruel irony. The more you pursue, the more you repel. The more you plead for recognition, the more you broadcast your lack. And the unconscious mind, yours and theirs, responds not to words but to energy, to vibration, to the silent language of need. Jung called the path out of this cycle individuation, the slow, sacred work of becoming whole within yourself, so that you no longer require external validation to feel complete. It is not a rejection of relationship, but a reorientation of it. You stop orbiting others and begin to center yourself. And when you do, something remarkable occurs. The person who ignored you begins to sense the shift. Not because you have manipulated the situation, but because you have altered your frequency. You are no longer broadcasting desperation. You are no longer vibrating at the frequency of lack. You have become still. You have become solid. And in that stillness, you become magnetic. But this magnetism is not a trick. It is not a tactic. It is the natural consequence of inner alignment. When you stop trying to force a connection, you create space for authenticity to emerge. And authenticity, true, unshakable authenticity, is the only thing that ever draws people in without diminishing you in the process. The moment you cease to chase, you cease to beg. And the moment you cease to beg, you reclaim your dignity. That is when the dynamic begins to shift. Not because they suddenly see your worth, but because you have finally embodied it. The real work begins not in their response, but in your silence. Not in their return, but in your refusal to return to old versions of yourself. The shadow, the part of you that believes you are unworthy unless seen, is activated in moments of rejection. It whispers that you are too much and not enough all at once. That you must try harder, be better, do more. But Jung warned that the shadow cannot be outrun. It must be faced. It must be integrated. Only then does its power over you dissolve. So when someone ignores you, do not ask, "What did I do wrong?" Ask instead, "What wound is being exposed?" Do not ask, "How can I make them see me?" Ask, "How can I see myself more clearly?" The absence of another is not a verdict on your value. It is an invitation to deepen your relationship with yourself. To ask, who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when no one is responding? Who am I beyond the roles I play to earn love? Most people waste this opportunity. They spiral into obsession. They reread old messages. They stalk social media. They construct elaborate narratives in their minds, assigning meaning to silence that was never intended. They exhaust themselves trying to solve a puzzle that was never meant for them. And in doing so, they drain the very energy they could be using to rebuild themselves from the inside out. The antidote is not revenge. It is not cold silence as punishment. It is not strategic withdrawal designed to provoke a reaction. The antidote is presence. Not presence directed outward toward the one who turned away, but presence directed inward toward the self that remains. When you choose to invest your energy in your own expansion, your creativity, your curiosity, your growth, you send a signal to the universe that you are no longer defined by another's attention. And that signal, subtle as it may seem, alters everything. Jung spoke of synchronicity, the mysterious alignment of inner and outer worlds when the psyche is in harmony. When you stop needing someone to validate you, the universe often responds by rearranging the pieces around you. Sometimes, that means the person who ignored you returns, not because you summoned them, but because your energy has changed. Your absence has become noticeable not as a void, but as a presence. You are no longer background noise. You are no longer static. You have become a force unto yourself. But, and this is critical, if you do this work only to lure them back, you have missed the point entirely. If your detachment is performative, if your silence is a strategy, if your growth is a means to an end, then you are still trapped in the same cycle. You are still giving them power. You are still defining your worth through their response. True transformation occurs only when you release the outcome. When you stop measuring your progress by whether they notice you, and start measuring it by how deeply you notice yourself. This is the threshold so many fail to cross. They do the work, but only halfway. They grow, but keep one foot in the past. They heal, but leave the door open for old wounds to re-enter. And when the person who once ignored them returns, they collapse back into the familiar rhythm of seeking approval, of proving their worth, of negotiating for scraps of attention. They mistake reconciliation for resolution. They confuse reunion for healing. And the cycle begins again. The true test is not whether they come back. The true test is whether you remain whole regardless of their choice. Whether you can stand in your own light, even if they choose to stay in the dark. Whether you can hold the boundary that says, I am no longer willing to shrink myself to fit into your world. This is not arrogance. It is integrity. It is the quiet declaration that your value is non-negotiable. Every time someone ignores you, they are not rejecting you. They are revealing you. Revealing the parts of you that still believe love is earned. Revealing the places inside you that equate silence with abandonment. Revealing the ancient contracts you signed in childhood that said, if I am good enough, they will stay. But those contracts were never fair. They were never true. And it is time to tear them up. The work is not to change their mind. The work is to change your relationship with your own mind. To recognize that their silence is not a sentence, but a mirror. What do you see reflected in it? Fear? Insecurity? A hunger for proof? That is where your attention must go. Not to them, but to the reflection. Because healing does not happen in their response. Healing happens in your reckoning. You must learn to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. To tolerate the ambiguity of silence without rushing to fill it with noise. To let the unanswered question hang in the air without forcing a resolution. This is where most people falter. They cannot bear the uncertainty. They rush to close the gap, to force closure, to demand answers. But Jung knew that the unconscious thrives in the liminal spaces, the in-between, the unresolved, the unspoken. It is in those spaces that transformation gestates. So when someone ignores you, do not rush to interpret. Do not rush to fix. Do not rush to react. Pause. Breathe. Turn inward. Ask, what is this moment asking me to feel? What is it asking me to release? What is it asking me to become? The answers will not come in words. They will come in sensations, in quiet realizations, in the slow dawning of self-trust. You are not broken because someone turned away. You are not unworthy because they chose silence. You are not less because they left. You are simply being invited again and again until you finally accept the invitation to root yourself in your own being so deeply that no external absence can shake you. That is the goal. Not to win them back. Not to prove them wrong. not to make them regret their silence, but to become someone who no longer needs their noise to know they exist. This is the essence of individuation, the journey from fragmentation to wholeness, from dependency to sovereignty, from seeking to being. And it is not a destination, but a practice, a daily choosing of yourself over the ghost of their approval, a daily reaffirmation that your worth was never in their hands to begin with. When you reach this place, when you can stand in the face of indifference and feel not panic, but peace, you will notice something extraordinary. The world begins to respond differently to you. People are drawn to your calm, to your clarity, to the quiet confidence that radiates from someone who no longer needs to be chosen to know they belong. You become a sanctuary, not a supplicant, a source, not a seeker. And if the person who once ignored you returns, you will meet them not from the place of the wounded child, but from the place of the integrated self. You will see them clearly, not as a savior or a villain, but as a fellow traveler, carrying their own wounds, fighting their own battles. You will no longer need them to complete you. And that, paradoxically, is when true connection becomes possible. Not the connection of need, but the connection of choice. Not the connection of lack, but the connection of abundance. This is the alchemy Jung spoke of, the transformation of pain into wisdom, of rejection into revelation, of silence into strength. It does not happen overnight. It does not happen without resistance. There will be days you falter, days you reach for your phone, days you rehearse conversations in your head, days you wonder if you've made a mistake. That is part of the process. The shadow does not surrender easily. It clings. It whispers. It tempts you back into old patterns. But each time you choose yourself, each time you turn away from the urge to chase and turn toward the practice of presence, you weaken its grip. You are not trying to become someone who doesn't care. You are becoming someone who cares deeply, but from a place of fullness, not emptiness. You are learning to love without losing yourself, to connect without contracting, to be present without becoming possessed. The world will always have people who turn away, who retreat into silence, who choose distance over dialogue. That will never change. What can change is your response. What can change is your relationship with your own worth. What can change is your understanding that your value was never contingent on their attention to begin with. So the next time someone ignores you, do not see it as a failure. See it as a threshold, a doorway into deeper self-knowledge, an opportunity to practice the most radical act of self-love, choosing yourself, even when it feels like no one else is choosing you. Let their silence be the space in which you rediscover your voice. Let their absence be the canvas on which you paint your wholeness. Let their indifference be the mirror that reflects not your lack, but your latent power. This is not about them. It never was. This is about you, and the life you are building, and the self you are becoming. One breath, one boundary, one act of courage at a time. You do not need their return to be complete. You are already whole. You always were. And when you finally believe that, not intellectually, but in your bones, the world will have no choice but to reflect it back to you. Not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it. And that, more than any strategy, any plea, any performance, is what changes everything. The journey does not end when they come back. The journey does not end when they stay away. The journey ends when you no longer measure your worth by either outcome. When you can stand in the fire of their silence and not be burned. When you can hold the space of their absence and not be emptied. When you can meet their return with curiosity, not desperation, with openness, not obligation. This is the maturity Jung envisioned, the adulthood of the soul, where you are no longer at the mercy of external validation, but anchored in the unshakable truth of your own being, where relationships are no longer lifelines, but landscapes, spaces you move through with awareness, with choice, with grace. You will know you have arrived when their silence no longer triggers you, when you can feel the sting, acknowledge the ache, and still choose peace. When you can say, I miss you, without meaning, I need you to fix me. When you can say, I love you, without meaning, I need you to stay. That is the freedom no one can take from you. That is the power no silence can diminish. That is the wholeness no absence can unravel. And it is available to you, not someday, not when they return, not when you've proven yourself, but now, in this breath, in this moment, in this choice, to stop chasing, to start centering, to become, finally, your own home. This is not a game. This is not manipulation. This is not strategy. This is evolution. The slow, sacred, often painful process of becoming who you were always meant to be, apart from, and because of every person who ever turned away. Let their silence be your sanctuary. Let their absence be your awakening. Let their indifference be the catalyst that finally brings you home, to yourself. Because in the end, the only person you ever needed to come back was you. And you're here now. That's enough. More than enough. That's everything.